Good evening, everyone. How are we doing? I am Chris, and I am here to review the first three episodes of Andor, or Star Wars Andor. It's the latest Disney Plus series. Oh my God, Disney just keep cranking them out, don't they? They really do. But yeah, latest Star Wars content, which is very interesting because I've kind of taken a bit of a personal break from Star Wars. For at least the last couple of shows, I haven't seen any of Bad Batch. I've heard mixed to positive things on that show. And Kenobi, I stayed away from almost entirely. I've seen a bunch of reviews on Kenobi. I've basically seen abridged versions of all the episodes, so I know exactly what went down in Kenobi. And I'm very glad that I stayed away from it. I wish I'd have done the same for Book of Boba Fett, but unfortunately, that was the last Star Wars show that I watched. So, the ultimate question, is this good or is this bad? As I said, we've got three episodes that have been released so far. They're calling it like the premiere, I guess. They've released the first three. I'm guessing that's pretty much going to be the first act of the series itself. And I was actually surprised by this. There are going to be 12 episodes in this series. And then it's going to be followed by a second and final series of 12 episodes, which apparently is then going to lead into Rogue One. There's a lot to discuss. It feels very strange getting back into Star Wars, I must admit. We're going to talk about it. We're going to go in depth into this thing. So before I do, though, a little bit of housekeeping. Please do consider subscribing to the channel. I am now 5 subscribers away from hitting 100. If we can hit those triple digits, that will be absolutely amazing. So, yeah, if you're into movies, if you're into TV shows, actually a lot of my recent content is TV show related. So between this and Rings of Power, there might be some other TV shows down the line as well, potentially House of the Dragon if people want to see that. Yeah, I jump on it. I do live reviews, live discussions, all of that good stuff. So if you're into that, do consider subscribing to the channel. There's a lot more content on its way. And while you're at it, give me a follow on Twitter as well. You can follow me at Hobbit Fan Editor. By the way, happy Hobbit Day. Today is Hobbit Day, 22nd of September. Just thought I'd throw that in there, although we're talking about Star Wars today. But at my Twitter, I post all the times that I'm going to go live. I've had to rejig a few things this week in terms of my weekly upload schedule. My computer died on its arse a few days ago, but thankfully, touch wood, it's all back up and running right now. So at the end of the stream, I'm going to tell you all the planned content for the rest of the week. So do stay tuned for that. In the meantime, let me know what your thoughts on Andor are. I mean, are a lot of people talking about this at the moment because, inherently Cassian Andor isn't really a known character all that much. He's very, very, if you go up onto the street and you say to someone, who's, Princess Leia, Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, like they know those characters. If you go up to someone and say, hey, do you remember Cassian Andor from that Star Wars movie? They'll be like, who? I'm guessing, like more often than not. But yeah, do let me know your thoughts on Andor. Were you looking forward to this thing? And what do you think to those first 3 episodes so far? Because that's what we're going to get into right now. As I say, if you tune in and you want to, drop a comment, please feel free to do so. It'll be good. And indeed, Nikki, she's on it. She's in the chat, everyone. Nikki says, I haven't heard a peep. No one I know is talking about the show. Yeah, it seems very quiet. It seems very quiet at the minute. And I'm guessing maybe that's because either number one, people are really tired of Star Wars at the moment and have just lost interest. I don't know if that's the case. I think the grand majority of people are still very much into Star Wars, which is why they keep cranking out this content. Or maybe it is because what I said, Andor, Cassian Andor himself isn't really a popular character enough to get people jazzed to watch the show. Or maybe they're going to give it a few weeks and then watch it later on down the line. I don't know. I really don't know. But if no one else is here to talk about it, then that's handy for me because I get to talk about it. So hopefully what I have to say is actually, hopefully there's some takeaway from it. Before I go into my review on this, I kind of need to tell you about my current state of Star Wars and kind of where I'm coming at this show from. So, I don't know if you guys can see this. If I tilt up that way, Star Wars posters, canvases. I've got videos up there. I own the original Star Wars trilogy about 10 times across loads of different VHSs and various DVDs and all that kind of stuff. Massive into it. Star Wars has been there almost since day one, since probably the age of 6 was when I got into it. Phantom Menace was my first Star Wars film. I've talked about this in the past, but I don't think I've actually properly talked about Star Wars on the channel just yet. Although I think I did a trailer reaction for Kenobi, didn't I? Now I come to think of it. So maybe I explained this in that. I can't remember. But it's been a massive part of my life. You know, the prequel. I grew up with the prequels, but the original trilogy as well. The hype leading into episode 7, and then the crushing disappointment of watching episode 7 on opening night. And then I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, but also, you know, Solo, The Last Jedi, and The Rise of Skywalker was just the nail in the coffin for me. Well, actually, no, I think The Last Jedi was, and then I think I just went to see Rise of Skywalker out of obligation. I didn't even particularly want to rush to the cinema to watch it on opening day. I was just kind of done. And then there's been 2 shows that have sort of piqued my interest a little bit. Well, 2.5. We're going to go into it. The first film that came out that really got me jazzed and, you know, I really enjoyed when it came out was indeed Star Wars Rogue One, the Gareth Edwards directed movie. I want to say Gareth Edwards directed it, but I think he directed a movie and then Disney got their claws into it and completely disemboweled it and stitched it together in the form of a film. But that clearly wasn't Gareth Edwards' original intent. And there's a lot of stuff in the, you know, the official trailers that came out for Rogue One that never made it into the movie. And I still wonder to this day what that movie would have been like or what that footage would have been like. Nikki says, I named a child Leia, then the sequels came out. Well, I mean, Leia doesn't necessarily do anything awful in the sequel trilogy. I think she probably gets off unscathed compared to at least, you know, Han Solo and certainly Luke Skywalker did out of the original cast. But that's awesome. That's parenting done right, by the way. Yeah, so, you know, Rogue One came out, and maybe it was because I was completely gutted by Force Awakens. And even at the time, you know, everyone was on the hype train for Force Awakens. Everyone was losing their fucking mind. And, you know, I understand it. It was a long wait, wasn't it, between episode 3. It sounds so weird going from episode 3 to episode 7, but you know what I mean. That long wait, the hype, a new Star Wars movie is here. The original cast is coming back. But everyone was just eating that shit up at the time. And I think now, in hindsight, where we've had episode 8 and we've had an episode 9, people have thankfully gone back and looked at 7. And I still hear people, you know, some people say like, oh, I enjoy 7. 7's fun. You know, it is what it is. It's very safe. It's very much like A New Hope, but it needed to be. And I'm like, well, no, it didn't need to be. It didn't need to be that safe. It's just J.J. Abrams being an uncreative asshole, as he always is, with his mystery box storytelling. Loads of things that never got a payoff in episode 9. But I hated Force Awakens from the beginning. I really genuinely hated it. I hated all the new characters, the treatment of old characters, the way that it was so unoriginal and it didn't really bring anything new to the table. Kylo Ren and Snoke notwithstanding, but then we saw what happened to Snoke in The Last Jedi. So when Rogue One came out the following year, I really didn't know what to make. You know, trailers came out for it, and I loved the teaser trailers where you had the Death Star like, you know, like the siren playing, and that first teaser trailer where the Death Star looks so imposing in the daytime sky. Maybe aided by the fact as well that was the year that I went to Star Wars Celebration. Can you believe I actually queued overnight? I was on a date that night as well. I passed up going to said woman's apartment to go back to a cold convention hall to lie on a cardboard box all night with the blinding lights on in this, you know, this vast convention hall thing. You had to queue up overnight to get a wristband at 6 a.m. to get entered into the final hall for the episode 8 sneak peek. Could you believe? Would I do that now, knowing what episode 8 turned out like? I'm angry at myself as to what I did that night. But hey, you live and you learn, don't you? You learn your lessons, and I've certainly learned my lessons with Star Wars. I'm never going to do that. Next year, Star Wars Celebration's coming back to London, and I sure as shit ain't going to that. So I've learned my lesson. But yeah, so maybe because I went to Star Wars Celebration in 2016, that helped my hype towards Rogue One going into it. But I actually came out of Rogue One going, you know what? I actually didn't hate that film. And at the time, I actually kind of loved it. I went to the cinema to see Rogue One, I believe, 6 times. 6 times at the cinema. Now, my opinion on Rogue One has become a lot more diluted and has calmed down since then. And since then, I still think there are loads of positives from Rogue One that I absolutely love. I think it's one of the best looking Star Wars films. I love the influence that you can clearly tell that Gareth Edwards had with that film. Was its sense of scale. He does scale very, very well. He did that in his original Godzilla movie, and he did it in Rogue One. You know, some of the cinematography in it and the music as well. Giacchino's score, it's absolutely beautiful. I love the character of Krennic. The Vader scene, I've seen some people criticize the final Vader scene with the lightsaber, saying, oh, you know, that was a studio thing. They just wanted to get Vader in there with a lightsaber. And does that kind of destroy a bit of the continuity with A New Hope? Yeah, kind of a lot of it. You know, I'm a member of the Imperial Senate on a diplomatic mission to Alderaan. You are part of the Rebel Alliance and a traitor. Take her away. He saw her ship flying away. So that, you know, and the thermal exhaust port with Galen Erso, it's plot holes that were never plot holes to begin with, but they filled those in. So I didn't really care for all that stuff. But yeah, I enjoyed it. And Rogue One gave me the feelings as a Star Wars fan that I was really hoping that I would have got from Force Awakens. And I think that's probably why I went to the cinema to see it 6 times, because I felt like I'd been hard done by Force Awakens. And it was Rogue One that gave me that sense of sort of like childhood joy again. You know, the space battle at the end, I still think is fantastic. You know, it's like, prepare a hammerhead corvette, and it pushes the Star Destroyer into the other Star Destroyer. It's fucking awesome stuff. I still love that stuff. And I still, you know, genuinely believe that Rogue One is the best Disney made content, at least in terms of the feature films. You know, an argument could perhaps be made for Mandalorian. Although I don't really like the direction that Mandalorian's going in, but that's going to be a conversation for another time. But in terms of the actual films themselves, I think that Rogue One is by far the best film that Disney has produced for Star Wars, comparatively. And then just, you know, over the years, I've just, with episode 8 and with episode 9, Solo, Book of Boba Fett, I've just really tuned out of Star Wars. I've reached the point where I just didn't care. I don't care. And I've made peace with that now. It's fine. It hurt for a while, but now I'm just kind of numb to it. It's fine. It happens to a lot of franchises that just get run into the ground. So, I mean, I skipped a whole Kenobi series because I was done with Star Wars, and having watched the reviews, I'm glad I did stay away from it. So what brought me back to Andor, which is going to bring, you know, 15 minutes into this live stream, and I'm only just starting to talk about Andor. What brought me back to Andor? Well, number one, I wanted to actually get some content out for you guys. It is the big new series, and I think a lot of people are going to watch it, but, you know, what you said, Nikki, about no one seems to be talking about it at the moment. Maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe no one's going to watch this show. But I was curious, and I think it's all down to those Rogue One links. And for the longest time, and I'm still kind of this way now, I'm like, why Cassian Andor? Why make a show on him? You know, we know how it ends. He gets caught up in the Death Star blast and he's gone. That's it. Did we really need to know the extensive backstory on Cassian Andor? And originally this was going to be a 5-season show. This takes place 5 years before the events of Rogue One, so I can only assume that each respective series, probably similar to Rebels actually in that way, was going to document each of the years leading up to Rogue One. But yeah, I just question the necessity of a Cassian Andor show. I actually think there's loads more characters that would have benefited, Rogue One characters that would have benefited from a show. Chief among them, Jyn Erso. I don't really like Jyn as a character. There's small little elements there that could have made her a compelling character, and all of those elements were just removed from the movie. We're introduced to her as a little girl at the beginning of the film. You know, she witnesses her mother get shot. She hides in this like little tunnel thing, and then Saw Gerrera comes and takes her away, takes her under his wing, and then we skip 30 years later, or however many years later it is, and she's grown, and we've lost all of that time. It's the same kind of Anakin argument that I see a lot, and I kind of incline to agree with as well. We never get to see Anakin's training. during his formative years, you know, when at the end of Phantom Menace, when he's a child and Obi-Wan takes him on, we needed to see that friendship develop, and we needed to see Anakin train and develop that, and all of that is just kind of lost, and we talked about it in hindsight. And I feel like Jyn Erso's cat, and the thing is, like, I know they filmed more stuff with her, because there was loads of stuff in the trailer with Saw Gerrera, completely different appearance. And I think we would have seen Jyn Erso maybe training with Saw Gerrera, and they could have gone into those more moral grey areas. Rogue One flirted with that a little bit, especially Cassian's first scene where he shoots his brother in arms, essentially, because there's the risk that he would be, he'd be captured by the Empire and give away all the secrets. And I remember watching it going like, oh, okay, that's interesting. It's, this moral grey aspect to what we're assuming is going to be our hero character. And I thought that was really interesting, but I don't really feel the film doubled down on it. But I still think now, if you're going to do a show on either Cassian Andor or Jyn Erso, I think a Jyn Erso show would be much more interesting and would actually serve more of a purpose, that it would enhance the Rogue One experience, I think, if we got that backstory from like a young Jyn Erso where she's training with Saw. But we don't have that. We have Cassian Andor, so here we go. I'm just going to go through some of the comments right now, then I'm going to actually get into the review proper. Nikki says, now Star Wars is one of the things where I just watch the reviews instead of the actual show. I'm 100% with you there. We're cut from the same cloth in that regard. Absolutely. Star Wars has two good things since the prequel, Mando and Rogue One. Yeah, totally agree with that. Mythic Dawn, how you doing, my friend? Dead prequel for a dead spin-off for a dead series. God damn. Well, actually, you'll find out in a minute that I'm actually not as hard on this series as you probably think that I'm actually going to be. I'm very mixed, and I'm going to try and express my thoughts over this live stream. And by the end of it, hopefully we come to some kind of conclusion by the end of it as to kind of where I'm at with this series. Yeah, Nikki, Cassian, who the fuck is Cal Kestis? Oh, where the fuck is Cal Kestis? Well, he's getting a sequel game, at least, That was actually a really fucking good game. Bath Time with Vaughn says, is this worth watching? I'm not a massive Star Wars fan, but I like good telly. Okay, that's a good jumping off point. That's an excellent question. Is it worth watching? You're not a massive Star Wars fan, but I like good telly. And this is where the answer's complicated, I'm afraid. It's not a clear-cut answer. So if I go into my positives first, and then I'll get into my negatives afterwards, because, as I say, there's both. The positives, I really like the tone of this thing so far. It comes across as a much more, I'm going to use all those buzzwords that everyone else does, darker, grittier, it feels more adult. It feels more mature take on Star Wars. It does away with iconography that you've seen to death. There are, in the first 3 episodes at least, and we know that it's going to end here eventually because we've got this Imperial officer who's going to be introduced into it later down the series. But the first 3 episodes, there's no stormtroopers. There's no talk of Death Stars. There's none of the usual stuff. There's no lightsabers. There's none of the usual Star Wars guff that Disney feel like they need to crowbar into everything. So that's both a positive and a negative, because you could watch this going, well, there's not really anything Star Warsy about it. And I did have that feeling too watching it this morning. I was like, this could just be a generic sci-fi action series. There's not a lot about it that's inherently Star Wars related. Obviously, you've got the blasters and the pew-pew-pews and the speeder bikes here and there, but other than that, it feels like a much more stripped back, much more kind of stark approach to Star Wars. Which I actually really appreciated, and I think fits into the tone very well of Rogue One. And I'd actually like to see Disney take more chances with this. Imagine my surprise where you've got, so far the writing for episode 3, for episodes 1, 2, and 3 of this show. It actually feels, there's no like awkward humor in there. There's no ridiculous pandering or anything like that. Everything feels kind of real. And I actually don't really have any problems with the script or anything like that. I'm not rolling my eyes at dumb jokes or characters that really don't need to be. Going back to Book of Boba Fett, you remember the mods with their brightly colored bicycles? And I'm thinking, like, why is this in the show? There's no awkward kind of Marvel humor in there, which, was all the way through the sequel trilogy with really awkward lines, it actually feels like it's written by an actual human being, which, imagine my surprise with recent Star Wars content. That also goes for the directing as well. When you look at, I mean, I only watched reviews of Kenobi, but believe me, that was enough. Kenobi looked very cheap. The directing was really bad. It looked like a low-budget TV show. The camera was kind of shaking all over the place like this. You just wanted like a fucking steady camera or a tripod. This actually looks like there's been thought put into the shots, the lighting, the cinematography, the composition, the way the camera moves, the way that the action's filmed. It actually feels like a proper director. And it, at least the first 3 episodes, feels like it's directed very, very well. And then if I get onto, I mean, I'm going to talk about it more in depth, don't worry. And then if I go on the flip side of it, it did feel the first 3 episodes to me, it was saved by episode 3. I will say that, because the first 2 episodes, they're about 40 minutes a piece, I think, 35 to 40 minutes a piece. And there's like bare minimum plot between at least 2.5 episodes. And I was really feeling the fatigue of it, and there wasn't enough to keep me engaged. I wasn't really entertained by it in any way. There's stuff that I do like about it, and I'll get into that more when we get into some of the characters and the action beats. But a lot of those moments where I really came around to it took place in episode 3, and not necessarily those first 2. Now, it is a 12-episode series, so we are, we're essentially reviewing a quarter, aren't we, of the show so far. So I mean, I'm going to be doing these reviews week to week now, but they've just released these 3 into the world. But it did feel a long time getting to the places it needed to get to. I think you could easily have cut these 3 episodes down to 1 episode. I genuinely believe that. I don't think you need... The amount of plot between these 3 episodes doesn't justify the runtime of having 3 episodes. They could have really chopped this down and got it to like a neat hour, I think. I genuinely believe that. I was watching episode 2 of this, and then it ended, and I thought, well, nothing's really been achieved with the plot. It hasn't really moved forward. And I'm not necessarily hating this show, but for the first 3 episodes, it is very slow. I've heard some people say it's a slow burn, which when we review it in the greater context, once we've got all 12 episodes out there, yeah, you could argue, yeah, it's a slow starter, but eventually it will lead to all of these great places with the show. But from the 3 episodes that we've got, it moves at a snail's pace. And I don't really think that many of the characters are particularly engaging enough at the moment to really get me jazzed about it. This didn't like fly off, all cylinders firing from the first 3 episodes. There's bits of it I like, but they tend to come more towards the end of episode 3 rather than those initial first 2 setup episodes. So it's complicated. On the one hand, I really appreciate the tone, and I'm looking forward to seeing where this develops to, and, being absorbed in this more grittier Star Wars world than perhaps, we haven't seen before. But then I'm kind of fearing that later down the line, when we get that new Imperial officer character in there, and we probably get into Stormtroopers and we get into more of the Star Warsy stuff, is it going to lose its foundation? So I think the biggest takeaway for me is that I love the world building so far. The way it looks, the direction's actually really good. And I don't hate any of the characters. I don't hate the script writing, but it's just a little bit dull at the minute. There's no drive. There's no verve. There's no, yeah, we're going on this adventure. You're kind of fist punching the air. It's a very, very different feel. And I genuinely think this is going to be one of those shows that's going to all come together for me. And I'm going to obviously formulate a proper opinion on it when all 12 are done, because I think it's that kind of storytelling. I'm just going to bring up some of the comments again. I'm going to periodically, dip back between me talking so that I actually get through this review and dip back to everyone else. Bath Time with Vaughn says, has it got as many cameos as Stormy's new video? Louis Theroux, Gabriel. Has it got as many cameos? I don't watch any of those channels. If you're talking about like cameos from characters and everything like that, no. You've got Cassian Andor, who's your main one, who we know from Rogue One, or maybe we don't know from Rogue One because he's not a very popular character. other than that, at the moment, there's no other main Star Wars character. It's all new characters. There's not even been a single stormtrooper at the moment, which I did think was kind of weird because, this is taking place when the Empire have taken control. Antagonists at the moment, if you can really call them antagonists, but what I like is that they're bringing in more of those morally grey elements that I really appreciated from Rogue One, but I didn't really feel like Rogue One doubled down on. But it looks like they are going to do that with this show. So we're introduced to, at the beginning of the episode, for example, the intro actually with Cassian really does remind me of Cassian's first scene from Rogue One. Very similar looking planet. I did make a couple of notes here because I'm still getting used to the planet names and everything. We start off on a planet called Morlana 1, and it's this very Blade Runner-esque Mass Effect kind of planet. It's, nighttime, raining, blue and pink neon kind of projecting over the buildings. Blade Runner, basically. It looks a lot like Blade Runner 2040. Was it 2049? 2039? I've already forgotten the name of that film. 2049, I think. The first scene is Cassian going into a brothel, and it's like this alien strip club kind of thing. And it really reminds me of that nightclub I think that was a strip club in the first Mass Effect game, if anyone's played that. And immediately from the setting, I was like, oh, okay, this feels really different from Star Wars. This is it feels really seedy. It feels, those Blade Runner feels. It feels lived in, where it's raining and it's just miserable, and, that kind of seedy nightclub dive bar kind of feel to it. There's a couple of these security guards. Let me see what they're called. Pre-more authority security officers. They're kind of sat at the bar as well, and they're throwing remarks. That they're drunk and abrasive, and they're throwing remarks at Cassian, and they're like, "What are you looking at?" Like, he's looking at me funny, kind of thing. They follow him out of there. So Cassian's looking for his sister. That seems to be his main mission for this series so far. He's trying to find his long lost sister, and he goes to the brothel to check if she was there, if she worked there, if the name had come up. He doesn't really get anywhere, so he leaves, and he's followed by these two security guards. And they're drunk and everything. They basically say, right, hands up, we're going to shoot you. And the camera is actually awesome. This is where I love the direction. Diego Luna, he's like putting his hands on his head, and the camera just stays on him. These guards are approaching him from behind and giving him shit, pointing a gun at him, but the camera never cuts to a different shot. Not at that point. It just lingers on him for seemingly quite a long while. And I love that. It's just little stylistic things like that I'm noticing from the direction, which I haven't really noticed in a lot of Star Wars films before this point. And he headbutts the guy, and I think he pushes him over, and he accidentally kills one of these security guards. And the other guy's begging for his life. He's trying to cut a deal with him. He's crying. It's raining. And he's like, this Cassian's pointing a gun at this dude, and Cassian just pulls the trigger point blank in the face. And right there, I was like, oh, okay, we're taking this tone with it. This is really, really cool. And it maintains that tone. And that's that's probably my biggest positive about it is the tone of this thing. And that did really remind me of, as I mentioned, Cassian's first scene in Rogue One, where, we think he's this hero guy. We don't think he's going to do anything like that. Boom, just like merciless, shot in the face, didn't even think twice, and hightails it out of there. So that's basically our opening scene from Andor, and I think that's a really cool opening scene, genuinely. I don't think that Diego Luna's the best actor in the world, but I enjoyed his character, I guess, for what it's worth from Rogue One. He was, a perfectly serviceable character. So I genuinely hope that this series, and indeed season 2, does really reinforce the Rogue One experience. I know that shouldn't happen and a film should stand on its own, and I still stand by that, but just in the sake of the grander Star Wars universe, if we've had these two series that really do flesh out of his character, we had that with the Clone Wars animated series for the most part as well. A lot of people were critical on Anakin's character and how we don't really know him, we don't really get a sense of that friendship and anything. But when you get to the Clone Wars animated show, over the course of many series, they really did flesh out that relationship between Obi-Wan and Anakin. So maybe this is going to have the same effect. Nikki says, wait, what? It's not a failure. I wouldn't call it a failure at the moment. Honestly, it could turn into a failure. There's a lot of things that I've seen from the trailer and a lot of behind the scenes discussion from the production and their intention, which does kind of raise a red flag with me a little bit. And I am worried knowing Disney's track record at writing some of these characters. But at the moment, I'm going to keep an open mind. Was I enthralled by it? No, not by a long shot. Was this the return to form for Star Wars that I've always wanted? Absolutely not. And it didn't really entertain me, but it has intrigued me. And that's why it's difficult to talk about, because I wasn't entertained by this. I wasn't loving this. I wasn't all over it. I wasn't really engaged in all the action and everything that was happening, because there actually isn't all that much action that happens. And, the characters aren't particularly enthralling, but they may eventually be by the time we get to episode 12. So it's very difficult to talk about. I do think, though, considering we're 3 episodes in and it's had, what would you say, 2 hours 15, 2.5 hours maybe over the course of 3 episodes, I do think they could have been more economic with the time, and I do think they could have packed a lot more character into that time than we did. Episode 2 really feels like it drags its heels. It really feels like nothing's accomplished with episode 2, and it feels incredibly drawn out, and they could have really truncated it. I think maybe with just cutting that time down or replacing it with some actual character stuff, I think that would have really helped it a little bit more. It's difficult to put my finger on, really, why it wasn't as entertaining as I hoped it would be. Bath Time says, I might watch the first episode then. I quite like sci-fi, but I haven't seen much good in years. Give the first episode a go. Honestly, give it a go. I think it all comes together by episode 3, though. I wasn't really won over on it on episode 1 or episode 2. And then I hit episode 3 and I thought, oh, for God's sake, this is going at a snail's pace and I'm really kind of bored. But then as episode 3 goes on, that's where I'd say by the end of episode 3, that's the end of Act 1. Or certainly your main end of Act 1 action scene that, we're going to go on to now onto our Act 2. Bath Time says, that Everything Everywhere All at Once, I think, is the last decent sci-fi thing I've seen. I actually haven't seen that, I don't think. And even that's proper weird. Was that the Michelle Yeoh film? I did hear really good things about that, actually, and it is on my bucket list of ones to watch from this year that I've missed out on. But if that's the one I'm thinking it is. Derpy Gaming says, I was very optimistic going into this show. I was very optimistic going in. This show is awesome, but it's different and unique. Yeah, I absolutely agree that it feels very different. It does feel very different, and different isn't bad. I think different is precisely what Star Wars needs at this point. There's so many point of views with new characters. Nikki says 12 half-hour episodes equals... Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. Morally grey characters then. So I kind of alluded to that at the beginning, and Cassian's showcasing that all the way through so far, but especially in that first scene. But our quote-unquote villains for this thing, so we don't have... The Imperials are mentioned. The Imperials are mentioned. We haven't seen them yet, but we know that they're going to come into it because there's this new female Imperial officer that we're going to have later down the line. But what we are introduced to are the Pre-More Authority security officers, and they're just basically keeping peace, right, on this planet. They hear that 2 of their officers have been killed by this guy, and you get this sort of new plucky guy. I get the impression that he's risen up the ranks and he's trying to become, like this main officer. I think Deputy Inspector, that's it, Cyril Khan, the character's name is. And he comes in and you get this at most workplaces, you get this brand new starry-eyed worker who comes in, who's going to change the world. He's going to change the face of the company. He's going to start putting the work in. He's going to clean up the whole thing and get people working and get it into shipshape and everything like that. And the main guy is like, look, this happens, we just sweep some of these murders under the rug, doesn't cause a fuss. And he's like, and I've got to go and give a presentation. I've got to go and talk to the Imperials, and I've got to assure them that everything on this planet that's run by us is A-OK. So that was where I was kind of weirded out, because I thought, well, the Empire control everything, right? So why wouldn't they have stormtroopers stationed on this planet? But this is like the next step under. This is just like, I get the impression that the Empire is just like, okay, we've got security guards that are kind of running that city, and just, we'll check in with them. We'll touch base and make sure they're doing their job and keeping things smooth. So the guy who's like leader of these security officers says, I've got to go and give my briefing to the Imperials, and I want to tell them that everything's A-okay. So I'm not going to bring up that these 2 officers of ours have been murdered, because then that's just going to raise loads of questions and make it look like I'm not doing my job. So just let it go. It happens. We move on. You're going to like run the place while I'm gone. I've got to go off to this planet and give a talk or whatever. But this guy comes in, he's like, no, I'm not letting that go. And you actually kind of appreciate that about him, because although those 2 security guards were absolute dicks at the beginning and probably deserved what they got, 2 people are dead, and it's all caused by this one guy. And he's like, no, I'm not going to stand for this. I want justice for this. He's killed 2 of our men, and we're going to bring him to justice. So, he's telling people to search through security footage, and it's like people you get at work where they're like, oh, do I have to? Like, oh, that's too much effort. We don't need to do that. And he's like, well, I'll get someone in who can do the job then. And you kind of admire that about him. And he's a very intriguing character, actually, especially by the time we get to the end of episode 3. The security officers actually work like an actual team and are actually kind of competent. So we're so used to seeing stormtroopers that are just, shooting at everything and missing the target, and that's become a trope now. Especially when we get to Mando and Book of Boba Fett, where you've just got stormtroopers there that are just lined up for the meat grinder. There's literally, they've become the new battle droids. They're just there to get shot, and it's just really boring. Any action scene now with a stormtrooper is just infinitely boring to me, because all the characters are going to get out of it. There's no tension. There's no peril in anything. It's especially in episode 9, where Rey was just running through the entire hangar looking for Chewie and just shooting stormtroopers left, right, and center, and there were no ramifications. It's so boring to watch. And Mando season 2 started doing that a lot as well, which really kind of got to me. But yeah, they actually, the way they're written, the security guards, they actually mobilize and communicate with each other like, I guess, like a police force would. And it's really great to watch, and they're actually competent, and they arrest people and they shoot people and people die, and it's actually cool to see them, and you really get the sense that they do have a camaraderie with each other. By the time we get to it, so there's 2 sort of main officers that are introduced. There is Cyril Khan, who I mentioned, and then I need to try and find that Mosk. I think the other guy's Mosk, and he's this big tanky motherfucker who comes in. And they're sent in, they pursue Cassian Andor from planet to planet to try and locate where he is. And they get him and they try and flush him out of this town. And when Cassian starts making his escape, and the whole village kind of rises up, because this is right in that moment where there's the hints of rebellion, and you've got pockets and towns and cities that are trying to repel against tyranny, and the security guards and everything. And everything's exploding, and, speeders are being blown up, and bodies are being flung everywhere. And the acting here is actually really good. So that's Cyril Khan's character. I'm going to have to keep referring to his name because the names are all really new to me. He gets apprehended by Cassian, and Cassian's like pointing a gun to his head, and he's like, right, tell me how many guys you've got outside. How many officers exactly, so we know what we're up against. And he's kind of shaky, and he's caught off guard, and you can tell he's never been put in this situation. He's probably had a desk job or something, and he's moved his way up. But now he's in like the thick of it. He's in like the actual war zone. He's on the front lines with this shit. And he probably never expected in a million years that the situation would escalate as much as it did. And now he's on his knees, and a guy's pointing a gun to the back of his head. And his voice is shaking. The acting's actually really good from this guy who plays Cyril Khan. At this point, you've got Stellan Skarsgård, I think. There's so many Skarsgårds, I always get them mixed up. Bootstrap Bill from Pirates of the Caribbean. He's behind Cassian. He's like, just shoot him. He's not going to tell us what we need. But the guy, like, there, we've got 12 guys. We've got 2 officers, 14 guys in total. Like, please, just let me go. And they gag him and they tie him up. One of the security guards eventually finds him. And then when everything's like all going to shit and, things are blowing up and Cassian's making his escape, Cyril Khan it looks like he's got PTSD. It looks like he is so out of his depth when all of this shit's going down. But you can tell he genuinely cares about his men. But there's a great scene at the end where that tanky guy comes up to him and he says, like, sir, like, we need to go. We need to leave now. And Cyril's just kind of stood there looking blank and looking horrified, looking around. He's like, we need to go now. He like basically almost like slaps him, like, you know, gather your senses, like get yourself together, which has made me really interested because now I kind of want to know this Cyril's backstory. I want to know if we do get a flashback, if he talks about what he's seen. Maybe he's been in wars before, or maybe it was just, it reminded me of, you know what it reminded me of, going back to Pirates of the Caribbean? Cutler Beckett. Cutler Beckett talks the talk, you know, he's behind a desk most of the time, he's always issuing orders. But when he's on that ship at the end and the Black Pearl and the Flying Dutchman are tearing that ship to pieces, and, you know, he's got his men like, orders, orders, sir, and he's in the thick of it, and that's the first time he's been in that situation, he completely fucking bottles it, and he doesn't know what to do. So it could be the fact that he has done something horrific, and he's almost getting like Vietnam flashbacks from it, or it could be that he's just out of his depth, and he's like, right, this is what we're up against now. We need to get everything together. And what's got me intrigued for episode 4 now as well and moving forward is the ramifications of this, because, you know, his superior said, put those deaths to one side, sweep it under the rug, you know, do a bit of paperwork and everything and keep a low profile because I'm going to the Empire to tell them that everything's okay. Now all this shit's gone down. His superior is going to come back, and I'm interested to see if there's going to be any repercussions for that. Or if this is what's going to bring the Empire into the fold, and they're going to be like, well, hang on, you said everything was okay. Who the hell's this Cassian guy? This guy's got ties to, you know, the rebellion and everything like that. And then that's going to bring the much greater force in. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of intrigued to see where that story goes, and genuinely some brilliant acting. And if we're going to compare that sort of like freaking out on the battlefield, way better handled and much more maturely handled than Finn at the beginning of Force Awakens. Finn, who as a child soldier has been indoctrinated into this creed for, like, you know, this way of life, this doctrine since birth, and that one stormtrooper dies on the field and he freaks out and all of a sudden turns good just like that, would never happen. And it was, everyone talks about that, how that's like a really good thing, and a stormtrooper defecting to the good guys could be a great story, and there is a great story in there, but the way it was handled in Force Awakens was absolutely terrible. Even from the off, like the first scene was completely off. But much better handled, much better written in this so far, and genuinely intrigued to see where it goes. Bath time. Oh, is referring to the film Everything Everywhere All at Once. Yeah, no, I love Michelle Yeoh. I think she's a fantastic actress. So yeah, genuinely really looking forward to that film. So it'll just be one that I have to catch up with in my own time. You know, when Disney isn't cranking out series every single week and Amazon aren't, you know, butchering Tolkien into the ground each week, then I get more free time. Yeah, genuinely, I'd love to go back and watch that film again. Amazon just deleted every 1-star review on Rings of Power. Wow. Yeah. It doesn't surprise me. They've been doing it since the beginning, Nikki. They've been doing it. They're silencing the negativity, and they're just going to pretend it's behind the scenes, though. They're shitting it. They're shitting a brick. And don't worry, because my channel's, well, hopefully, touch wood, my channel's not going anywhere. So yeah, tomorrow night, and I'll go through that at the end, what you can expect. We do have a bunch of other characters in there, and periodically, similar to Book of Boba Fett, actually, you'll get like the main thrust of the narrative, and then we'll dip back to a flashback real quickly, and then it will carry on. And we're getting that, so we're getting a bit of Cassian's childhood and everything like that, because we know, I have been in this, I've been in this fight since I was 6 years old. Well, in the flashback, he looks a bit older than 6, but I mean, I don't know. So there's a whole storyline going on there. There's the actress who played, oh God, what's the name? Aunt Petunia in Harry Potter, Petunia Dursley, Fiona Shaw. She's kind of playing Cassian's adoptive mother, who rescued him at a very, very young age and sort of brought him into the fold. So there's stuff going on there. It is a little bit light on character at the moment, I will say. That it's established kind of a core character base, but I don't necessarily find any of them particularly interesting at the moment. And that's why I'm really mixed on the show. I'm like, we've had 2.5 hours. We've had more than a feature, well, pretty much a feature film's length. And it feels like it's dragging its heels a lot, and it feels like it's very padded. But there are some good things in there, and there are some intriguing aspects to some characters, and the moral grey stuff is the stuff that I live for. I think it's really cool that they're introducing that to Star Wars. Now, these first 3 episodes were all directed and written by Toby Haynes and Tony Gilroy, respectively. From episode 4 onwards, well, from episode 4 to 6, we've got Susanna White directing and Dan Gilroy writing. I wonder if Tony and Dan are brothers. Maybe they are. That's interesting. Then it's going to be passed to another director and writer for episode 7. Back to Toby Hayes with a different writer of Bo Willimon. It's going to juggle all the way through the series. So that does concern me. I am thinking, because the show is being, buffeted around to a different director here and a different writer there. And I know Mandalorian's done that, but you can always see the different writers' influence and the different directors' influence. I always prefer when it's one director, one writer, and it's, it's one director's vision. For better or worse, it could be terrible, but at least it's that director's vision. So I am kind of concerned that because we're going to be jumping around a lot with loads of different directors and writers and everything, that might harm the series. I hope that's not the case, because I do want this to feel like one cohesive story. And there are elements that they have talked about which do give me cause for concern. And I don't want it to fall into the pitfalls that have happened before with Disney stuff. We've got our new Imperial officer, female Imperial officer. Haven't got a problem with that at all. If she's written well, and I really want it to be written well, because the writing, while it's not enthralling, as I've mentioned, everyone feels human at the moment. Everything feels in place. I just want the characters to be a little bit more interesting, but hopefully that will come with time. I don't want them to do the typical thing of, where I'm going with this. Just the typical stuff that Disney's done before. I want her to be a well-written, complex character with multiple layers to her and be a genuinely compelling character. I'm down for it, and I really hope that's the case. I don't want Disney to kind of fall back on their arse like they always do, because it seems like they haven't been able to write a properly strong female character in a long time that's interesting. They always write a Mary Sue character, but they haven't written a very interesting female character in a long, long time. That includes the character who was in Kenobi, kind of making Aunt Beru Action Jackson by the end of that series, which just was really out of place. Everything feels in place, and that's probably one of my biggest compliments about the show so far. Everything feels like it's in place, and I just don't want them to shit the bed with it. And I'm worried they might, when it gets into the more Star Warsy stuff, when we start having Star Destroyers and Stormtroopers and the Empire. And then are they going to go, oh, well, we'll get a cameo from Ian McDiarmid in there as the Emperor issuing orders to someone. Oh, we've got to have Vader's voice on a... When we get those Star Warsy things come into it, that Disney always feel like they've got to crowbar into something to make it feel like Star Wars. Because I think this is doing well on its own so far. I genuinely think it's doing well on its own so far, and it just feels like a breath of fresh air. It doesn't feel like it's a greatest hits of Star Wars. It doesn't feel like we've got to tick all these boxes. We've got to have a Death Star. We've got to have this. We've got to have that. At least for these first 3 episodes, it feels like it's done away with that. It feels very lived in. We've got this the planet actually that... So we've got Blade Runner planet, and then after Cassian leaves the planet, I made a note on here. I think the planet's called Ferric or Ferrix or something like that. It feels a lot like WALL-E. There's one of the introductory scenes to Ferrix is this cute little robot character, this cute little droid trundling along this trash planet, and it really reminded me of WALL-E. So I like the look of the world. There's a lot of practical stuff in there, and as I say, it doesn't feel cheap. It when you watch Kenobi, it feels like a really low budget TV show, despite the fact that it's made by Disney. The way the action was shot, the choreography was terrible. The baby Leia chase scene was absolutely ridiculous. The lightsaber fights were poorly choreographed. But everything feels really good so far with this in terms of its directing and its tone. Biggest strong points for me, absolutely, at the moment. There's also a character called Tim. It's Tim spelt with 2 M's. And, you've got... Well, I guess you've got stuff like Luke, haven't you? Which is a conventional name, I suppose. Loads of Star Warsy names. Obi-Wan Kenobi and Qui-Gon Jinn, Anakin Skywalker and Padme Amidala and everything like that. But you do have Luke, you have Ben, don't you? Ben Kenobi, Ben Solo. Then you got Tim, and it just reminded me of Monty Python, the Holy Grail. It's like, there are some who call me Tim. Don't know, just made me laugh. But yeah, I guess that's kind of my review so far. I'm a bit negative on the music as well. The score's a little bit weak so far. There's a bit where there's like a drum kit that comes in that doesn't feel very Star Warsy in terms of its music. But even when I was watching Mandalorian initially and I heard the music and it kind of sounded a little bit like Rocky, I thought, oh, this doesn't sound like Star Wars music. But over the years, I've grown to absolutely love the Mandalorian music now. So maybe the score will grow on me with this one. I'm interested to see where this one goes from the trailers and everything. We've seen Mon Mothma. We've seen scenes that are set in the Senate. As I say, we've got the Imperials coming into it later on down the line. The fact that it is 12 episodes and the trailers probably haven't showed half of the stuff. Are we going to get K2SO in this series, or is he going to come into it in season 2? I don't know, but it's got me intrigued. I'm not enthralled by these first 3 episodes, and I definitely think they are very slow, slower than they definitely needed to be. I didn't have a wonderful, fantastic time watching these 3 episodes, but there are elements to the episodes that I think are good, and with further episodes down the line and more development, could be great. So I'm kind of in the middle. I don't know where to review this because I didn't enjoy these episodes and it didn't really entertain me. I don't know whether to give it a really, really low score, but then because there's things in it that I like in terms, the cinematography, the directing, the fact that the screenplay didn't want me to tear my fucking eardrums out, and I like the tone of it. Does that tend it towards more the middle, or is that a positive? I don't know. This is why I don't rate things out of 10. This is why I just talk and hopefully things come out. The first 3 episodes at least have done away with a lot of the Star Warsy stuff. So at least in terms of these first 3 episodes, this does just kind of feel like it feels like any other sci-fi show. It doesn't necessarily feel like Star Wars, which I actually kind of like about it. Although we do know that later down the line, it is going to go into the more Star Warsy stuff that I know. But, characters like Mon Mothma and this Imperial officer, I just really want them to be well-written characters. I love the character of Mon Mothma. I think the actress who plays is fantastic as well. Imagine that actress's journey playing that character. So she was cast as a young Mon Mothma in a deleted scene from Revenge of the Sith. She was never in the final film. That scene got cut. And then that same actress years down the line was recast in Rogue One to play the same character. And now she's in this series. Like, it's great. It's absolutely great. And she's a fantastic actress as well. Really embodies... She feels like a young Mon Mothma. She plays it very, very well. She even looks a lot like her, which is great. So I think Mon Mothma is going to be a focal character in this based on the trailer. And I just hope she's written well. I don't want it to be like a Galadriel kind of character, going back to Rings of Power, where every single line that emits from that woman's mouth is just obnoxious, is just abrasive and just bitchy and just... We're going to get onto Rings of Power tomorrow. So all the pieces are there. I just don't want them to shit the bed with it. And that's kind of where I'm at. So I'm repeating myself now anyway. So I can't really talk in depth about it because not a lot of plot really happens over the course of the 3 episodes, which is one of my biggest criticisms. But yeah, take that for what it's worth, at least. I'm going to be back next week. I'm going to try and get the Andor episodes out on Wednesday because I think that all the episodes go up on a Wednesday, I think. Let me just double check that. Yeah, so episode 4 is going to be out on the 28th. So I'm going to try my hardest to get the weekly reviews out for Andor every single Wednesday. Let's just say, should we just keep it to 11 p.m. just as a nice round number? That tends to be the time that I tend to go live. If it changes, I'll let you guys know. But for right now, let's do 11 p.m. on Wednesdays. I only moved it to Thursday this week because there were 3 episodes out. I thought it was just going to be 1 that was released, but they released 3. And I didn't have time to watch all 3 yesterday, which is why you've got it today. But if it's just going to be 1 episode now from here on in, and this is actually going to take us pretty much towards the end of November as well. So we've got about a month's worth of Rings of Power left. We've got Andor going through towards the back end of November. Bond's coming to an end as well in a few weeks' time, but I've got other content planned as well. So there's going to be plenty of stuff. So don't worry about that. which will take us very nicely onto the end. So please do consider subscribing to the channel for more movie reviews, discussions, and live streams. For the future Andor ones as well, I'm going to try and get my mate JX Editor on here as well. He's a massive Star Wars fan, and I think it would be really good. We differ opinions a lot on Star Wars. We have full-blown arguments about Star Wars sometimes, which usually ends with me just losing enthusiasm about it and not caring enough about Star Wars anymore, so I always tend to back down. But I'd really like to get his input actually on this, and I think that he knows like the old lore as well, like Legends and the expanded universe and stuff. So I think it'd be really cool to get him on a live stream. It's been a long time since I've had a proper face-to-face chat with him, so that could be really cool. And talking about Star Wars as well with him, it's always a pleasure, even when we're arguing. So please do subscribe to the channel. As I said, I'm at 95 subscribers right now. I'm so close to 100, so let's make that dream a reality. Let's get to triple digits, and I promise you guys I'll do a Q&A video as well if I get to 100. Or I don't really know. I want to do something special for you guys, but I never really know what to do that's special. So maybe a Q&A, I don't know, where we can just shoot the shit, just talk about movies, talk about whatever, and we'll see what comes up. Give me a follow on Twitter as well. You can follow me at Hobbit Fan Editor. I'll post all the times that I go live and my crazy chaotic schedule of stuff that I've got planned for the channel. I have got a lot planned for the channel. I'm not just saying that. So lots to come. In the meantime, let me know what your thoughts on Andor are. If you've seen it, if you haven't seen it, we've actually had a few people tonight that haven't watched it. So maybe that's why we're not seeing a lot of people talking about it. Maybe they're hanging back to see what the reviews are like first. Wise. And, you know, then going into it after that. So, yeah, if you're curious about it, give it a shot. Genuinely give it a shot. But I will say, if you're going to watch it, watch all three. I think the first two episodes are incredibly slow, and it only starts to come together more for me in episode 3. So just be mindful of that. But yeah, if you've seen it, if you love it, if you hate it, if you're in the middle on it, just let me know, because I love having a conversation with you guys. Tomorrow, I'm going to be live again. So you better not get tired of me. You actually got me 3 days back to back. Today, tomorrow, and Saturday. So tomorrow, I'm going to be live at 11 p.m. once again for the Rings of Power episode 5 review. You know, watching the Rings of Power is an absolute chore, and I absolutely hate it. But what I do love is talking about it with you guys in the evening. So I always do look forward to that in the evenings on a Friday. And because my computer just had an absolute shit fit on Tuesday, and unfortunately I had to break tradition and I couldn't do my James Bond review on Tuesday, I did, however, go and see Skyfall at the cinema. I'm going to be rescheduling my review to this weekend, so that's going to be Saturday the 24th of September, once again at 11 p.m. British Standard Time, and I'm going to be catching up on my Skyfall review. Skyfall is one of the biggest Bond films. There's a lot to talk about with it, positives and negatives from me on Skyfall. And then that will take us very nicely into next week, where we're back on track on Tuesday with Spectre, finishing the week after with No Time to Die. And that will be the Bond, 60 years of Bond, all done and dusted. On the comment of Star Wars, actually, on Saturday early afternoon, I'm going to be in London for a concert at the Royal Albert Hall. I'm off to see Return of the Jedi in concert. I've seen A New Hope in concert. I've seen Empire Strikes Back in concert. And then this concert's been pushed back many, many years because of COVID. So that's going to be fantastic. Just immensely skilled musicians that are going to make me feel very jealous of their talent. And to Return of the Jedi, which is my favorite Star Wars movie, which might be a bit of a controversial opinion. I'm not sure. It's going to be an absolute pleasure. So yeah, thank you to everyone that's tuned in tonight. I do appreciate it, guys. I love hearing from you. It's great to have a conversation with you as well. So thank you to Nikki, to Bath Time, to Derpy, and to everyone else who signed in and dropped a comment. Mythic Dawn as well. Can't forget you as well. I really do appreciate it, guys. You make this worthwhile. And yeah, tomorrow, Rings of Power. It's going to be awesome. My live stream, I mean, not the show. The show's going to be terrible. I'll catch you tomorrow. Take care.